Fix it by sundown, kid, or I come back for the shop. The man didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice was low and flat, the kind of voice that had already decided what happened next, and Caleb felt every word land like a wrench to the chest. I was 19 years old, standing alone in a garage that smelled like old oil and broken promises, staring at a blood-red 1947 Harley-Davidson knucklehead that 5 other shops had already refused, and a mountain of a man named Grip was walking out the door like the devil himself had somewhere better to be. Before we go any further, if you're watching this, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because what happens next in this garage is something you do not want to miss. The bay doors were still rattling from where Grip had pulled them open. Not kicked, pulled. With one hand, the chain lock had snapped clean off its bracket, and now it lay on the concrete floor like something that had given up trying. Caleb hadn't moved. He stood with his arms at his sides, watching a man the size of a refrigerator climb off a motorcycle and look around the garage, the way a judge looks around a courtroom, like he'd already decided the verdict and was just taking inventory of what he was going to take. Silas Henderson. Everyone called him Grip. Caleb had heard the name. Everybody in Oildale had heard the name. You didn't need to look up his jacket. The patch on his back told you everything. Hell's Angels, Sergeant-at-Arms, Bakersfield Charter, and the way the other 2 riders who'd come with him stayed outside, not talking, not moving, just watching the street like they were paid to notice things that told Caleb the rest. "You Hector's nephew?" Grip asked. He walked around the knucklehead slowly, not looking at Caleb yet, just looking at his own bike. The way a man looks at something he loves and is furious at. "Yes, sir," Caleb said. He didn't know why he said sir. It just came out. "Hector's dead. 6 months ago, yes, sir." Grip finally looked at him. The man's eyes were pale gray, which was somehow worse than if they'd been dark. Dark eyes you could hide from. Pale gray eyes followed you. "You're running this shop now." Caleb looked around at the cracked concrete floor, the workbench with the 3-legged stool propped against it, the pegboard on the wall where tools hung in the shapes of tools that used to be there but weren't any more, sold off one by one over the last 4 months to keep the lights on. "Yes, sir." "How old are you?" 19. Grip made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. It was the sound a man makes when something confirms exactly what he already suspected. He looked back at the knucklehead. "I've had this bike into 5 shops. Sacramento, Fresno, Modesto, 2 in Bakersfield." He paused. "You know what every one of them told me?" Caleb shook his head. "They told me the bike was fine." Grip's jaw tightened. "Rode it out each time thinking it was fixed. At highway speed, it tries to kill me." He turned back to Caleb. "Third shop, I came off the bike at 62 miles an hour on the 99. Walked away. Barely." He held up his left hand, 2 fingers bent at angles fingers weren't supposed to bend at. "That was 8 months ago. They're still crooked." Caleb looked at the hand. He looked at the bike. Something in his brain, the part that his uncle had spent 12 years training, without either of them knowing it was training, started moving. A quiet, methodical clicking, like tumblers in a lock. "What kind of misfire?" he asked. Grip blinked, like the question surprised him. "What, the misfire? Is it a stutter like a skip, or does it grab and then let go? Or does it feel like the whole motor just drops out for a second?" A long pause. Grip tilted his head. "Drops out," he said slowly. "Like somebody pulled the plug, then it comes back. Then at higher speed it gets worse." Caleb nodded. He walked toward the bike. "How long before it happens, from the moment you get up to speed?" "Maybe 4 or 5 minutes. Consistent. Every single time, like clockwork." Caleb crouched beside the front wheel and looked up the frame without touching anything. "Does it get worse in heat?" Grip stared at him for a moment. Then quietly, "Yeah, it does." Caleb stood up. "I'll need until sundown." "It's 11 in the morning." "I know." Grip stepped closer. Not aggressively, just enough that Caleb could smell leather and motor oil and something metallic underneath. "Let me be real clear with you, son. I am not in the habit of leaving my bike with people I don't know. But every shop I've trusted with this has sent me back out there to die on it." He leaned in slightly. "So if you touch this bike and you send me out there and it tries to kill me again, that's the end of this shop. You understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes, sir." "And if you find something, if you actually find what's wrong, I pay cash. Whatever the number is, I don't negotiate on work that saves my life." Caleb nodded. His mouth was dry. His hands were steady. Grip reached into his cut and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He set it on the workbench. That's my number. You call when it's done. He looked around the shop one more time. You got a dyno. Out back. Something shifted in Grip's expression. Not respect, not yet, but acknowledgement. A 19-year-old kid in a shop that was clearly falling apart still had a dynamometer. All right, he said. He walked toward the bay doors and stopped, without turning around. Don't let me down, kid. Then he was gone. The sound of 3 motorcycles leaving faded out slowly like a storm moving off. Caleb stood in the silence for exactly 10 seconds. He counted them. His uncle used to tell him, when something big hits you, give yourself 10 seconds to feel it. Then you go to work. He felt it. The fear, the pressure, the impossible weight of that deadline, felt all of it rise up through his chest like a wave. And then he exhaled, and he went to work. He started at the top and worked down. That was the discipline. You do not chase symptoms. You start at the beginning and you let the machine talk to you. Spark plugs first, he pulled all 4. The left front was carbon fouled slightly. He set it aside, noted it kept moving. Not the problem. A fouled plug would cause a consistent issue, not a speed-dependent one. He checked compression on each cylinder with his uncle's old gauge. The dial face cracked, but still accurate. Numbers came back strong and even. Not the problem. Fuel lines, he traced every inch from the petcock to the carb, looking for cracks. Kinks, any place where heat expansion could cause a vapor lock. Nothing visible. He pulled the carburetor and broke it down on a clean rag on the workbench. Needle jets, float bowl. Everything looked right. He cleaned it anyway, reassembled it, set it back. He checked the points, the condenser, the coil. He tested the wiring harness with a meter going section by section. Everything read within spec. An hour and he had found nothing. He wiped his hands and looked at the bike. The knucklehead sat there, blood red and silent, like it was keeping a secret. These old bikes weren't like modern machines. They didn't have computers to lie to you or codes to read. They had their truth hidden in iron and steel, and you had to earn it with your hands. Caleb's uncle had told him that once, sitting right here in this same garage, when Caleb was maybe 9 years old, too small to reach the top of the engine, but big enough to hand Hector tools and listen. The machine always tells the truth, Hector had said. You just have to learn how to listen. Caleb rolled the knucklehead out back to the dyno. He strapped it down, mounted the rear wheel to the drum, and started the motor. It fired immediately. The engine had beautiful startup character, deep and crisp. He let it warm up for 5 minutes, watching the gauges. Temperature climbed steadily. Oil pressure settled. Nothing unusual. He put it in gear through the dyno and started building RPMs. 40 miles per hour equivalent. 50. Smooth. 60. Still smooth, the motor singing that old knucklehead song, the exhaust note bouncing off the back fence. He pushed it to 70. Smooth. 75. The engine dropped out. Not a stutter, not a gradual fade. It just vanished, one moment full power, the next moment nothing. A deep stumble that shook the whole frame, and Caleb's hand came off the throttle instantly. He let it settle back down and sat there listening to the idle. I understood now why it had tried to kill Grip 3 times. At 75 miles per hour, if you were on the open road and that happened, you'd have 2 seconds to react before the rear wheel started trying to pass you. On a 1947 rigid frame with no modern suspension, that was enough to kill you, enough to throw you across the highway. He looked at the frame, not the engine. The frame. Something his uncle had said once about a bike that came in years ago, a problem nobody could trace. Hector had found it in the last place anyone looked. The frame itself. Caleb hadn't thought about it in years, but now standing here watching this bike idle, after nearly killing him on the dyno, it came back. Sometimes the problem isn't in the parts, Hector had said. Sometimes the problem is in the bones. Caleb got down on the concrete and looked at the frame from underneath. He ran his hand along the main down tube, the large central spine that everything hung from. And he felt it, not saw it, felt it. A seam, subtle, barely a millimeter of difference in the surface where it shouldn't have been. He got up, got his flashlight, got back down, shined it up inside the tube from the lower opening. His blood went cold. There was a sleeve inside the main down tube, a metal insert machined, precise, deliberate. And it had been placed in there in a way that at rest, at low speed, at normal vibration, it seated correctly and caused nothing. But at a specific harmonic frequency, the frequency that a loaded knucklehead engine produced at sustained highway speed, In heat, it would move, microscopically, enough to transfer vibration directly into the frame in a way that caused momentary fuel and electrical disruption from the flex. This was not a manufacturing defect. Manufacturing defects were random. This was exact. This was someone who knew motorcycles, who knew this specific motorcycle had placed that sleeve deliberately. This wasn't a bike that was broken. This was a bike that had been sabotaged. Caleb sat up. He set the flashlight down. He looked at the phone number on the folded piece of paper sitting on his workbench. He thought about calling Grip right now and telling him what he'd found. He thought about what Grip would do when he heard the words. He thought about who might have done this and whether calling Grip would start something that would end badly for people who had nothing to do with it. He thought about the two crooked fingers on Grip's left hand. I thought about the fact that whoever put that sleeve in there had known exactly what they were doing. This wasn't meant to slowly damage the bike. It was meant to cause a catastrophic failure at speed. This was designed to kill a man. Caleb looked at the clock. It was 1:47 p.m. He had maybe 5.5 hours until sundown. He picked up the phone. He put it back down. He picked up a wrench instead. I wasn't going to call, not yet, because if he called and said someone sabotaged your bike, without being able to show the fix, without being able to prove he could make it right, he was handing Grip a lit fuse and stepping back. That helped nobody. What Grip needed wasn't an explanation. Grip needed a safe bike, and Caleb was going to give him one. He started with the exhaust. You couldn't get to what he needed to get to without clearing a path. He unbolted both headers carefully, setting each nut in a tray in order. Methodical, everything goes back exactly where it came from. His uncle's voice again. You can be in a hurry and still be precise. You've got to be both. The transmission came next. He didn't need to remove it completely, but he needed clearance at the lower frame junction. He loosened the motor mounts, felt the engine settle slightly in the frame, and now he had access to the area around the down tube. He got the tube cutter and made his first cut clean and deliberate at the precise point he needed to open the frame. The sleeve slid out. He held it in his palm, looked at it. It was machined on a lathe, smooth, accurate, professional. Someone who had access to proper machine tools had made this. This was not a shade tree sabotage job. This was skilled, calculated, intentional harm. Caleb felt something he hadn't expected to feel: anger. Not fear, pure cold anger on behalf of a man he'd known for 45 minutes. He set the sleeve on the workbench and went to his steel stock. He found a piece of solid round stock, right diameter, cut a slug from it, and took it to the bench grinder to bring it to spec. He was going to replace the sleeve, not patch over it, not just remove it and leave the tube open. He was going to put a proper reinforcement in its place, weld it solid, and make this frame stronger than it had ever been from the factory. If someone had gone to the trouble of engineering a death trap, Caleb was going to engineer it back to life. He fired up the MIG welder, checked his gas, set his amperage. He thought of his uncle Hector had taught him to weld right here on the same machine with scrap pieces of flat stock back when Caleb's arms still shook with the weight of the gun. Slow down, Hector had said. You're fighting the machine. Stop fighting it. Move with it. He stopped fighting. He moved with it. The weld bead laid down smooth and even, tracking along the sleeve's edge, fusing the solid slug into place inside the frame. He ran a second pass, checked the penetration with his flashlight. Solid. He let it cool, ran his hand over. It tapped it with the handle of a screwdriver. It rang like iron, like truth. He reassembled in reverse order. Transmission. Motor mounts torqued to spec. Headers. He checked every connection twice. Each wire, each fuel line, each bolt. The afternoon light moved through the high window of the garage, stretching long and orange across the concrete floor. Time was moving. He could feel it in his chest like a second heartbeat. At 4:30 p.m., the knucklehead was whole again. He rolled it back to the dyno, strapped it down, fired it, and the motor came up, same beautiful deep bark. He let it warm. 5 minutes. He put it in gear, built the RPMs, climbed through the speed range, 60, 65, 70, 75. The motor didn't drop out. He held it there. 5 seconds. 10, 30. He pushed it to 80. Still clean. 85. He could feel the dyno drum vibrating under his feet, the whole apparatus shaking with the power of a 75-year-old engine running at full song, and it was clean, clear, smooth. Not a stumble, not a hesitation. He cut the throttle and let it spin down. He sat in the sudden quiet and he thought about what he'd found. He thought about the sleeve. He thought about who had put it there and what they'd intended. And he made a decision about what he was going to tell Grip when he walked back through those bay doors. He wasn't going to hide it. He wasn't going to soften it. He wasn't going to pretend it had been a manufacturing issue or a mysterious electrical fault. He was going to tell the truth, show the evidence, and let the man decide what came next. Because whoever had done this, that was a problem bigger than a garage in Oildale, and Grip deserved to know his life had been in someone's crosshairs. Caleb rolled the knucklehead back inside. He wiped it down every surface, every chrome fitting, every spoke. He cleaned his own hands. He looked at the clock. 5:52 p.m. The sun was still up, but it was leaning. The heat had started to give up its worst of itself, settling into that late valley afternoon weight that pressed on everything but didn't burn quite as hard. Caleb sat on his three-legged stool and looked at the bike and felt something he hadn't felt in 6 months. Not pride, not quite. Something quieter than that. Something that felt like his uncle watching from somewhere just out of sight and not looking disappointed. He picked up the phone and dialed the number on the folded piece of paper. It rang twice. Done, Grip's voice. Just that one word. Done, Caleb said. But I need you to come back alone, or with one other person you trust completely, because I found something on your bike, and you need to hear it before anybody else does. A silence that lasted long enough for Caleb to wonder if he'd made a mistake. Then Grip said, I'll be there in 20 minutes. Caleb set the phone down. He looked at the sleeve sitting on the workbench. He looked at the knucklehead. He looked at the bay doors. Outside, the valley was going gold in the evening light, and somewhere in the distance, he could just barely hear the sound of engines not closed yet, but moving, like weather building at the edge of a clear sky, like something coming that you couldn't stop and couldn't run from and had no choice but to stand in front of. He folded his hands in his lap, and he waited. Grip came back in 19 minutes, not 20, 19, which told Caleb something about the kind of man he was, the kind who, when something mattered, showed up early. I didn't come alone. There was one other man with him. Older, shorter than Grip by half a foot, but built like something carved, rather than grown, with a white beard trimmed close, and eyes that moved around the garage, the way a hawk's eyes move over a field, not threatening, just cataloging. He wore the same cut as Grip. His center patch said the same thing. But above the chapter rocker, where Grip's patch said Sergeant at Arms, this one said President. Caleb stood up from his stool. This is Iron Jack Crowley, Grip said. He goes where I go on something like this. Caleb nodded at Crowley. Crowley didn't nod back. He just looked at Caleb the way you look at a door before you decide whether to open it or walk through the wall next to it. Then he looked at the bike, then back at Caleb. You said you found something, he said. His voice was even quieter than Grip's. That same flat register that didn't need volume because the weight was already there. Yes, sir. Show me. Caleb had set the sleeve on a clean white rag on the workbench. He picked up the rag, held it out so both men could see it. The sleeve sat there 3 inches long, machined smooth, a perfect cylinder of steel. Unremarkable to anyone who didn't know what they were looking at. Both men looked at it without touching it. What is that? Grip asked. It was inside your main down tube, Caleb said. Seated about 8 inches up from the lower opening. From outside the frame, you'd never see it. Even if you looked inside the tube with a flashlight at a normal angle, you'd probably miss it unless you knew what you were looking for. He paused. It's precision machined. Whoever made it had access to a lathe and knew exactly what tolerances they needed. Crowley's eyes moved from the sleeve to Caleb. And what does it do? Caleb set the rag down. At low speed, nothing. It sits in there and causes no problem at all. But this engine, a knucklehead, at load running, hot at sustained highway RPM, produces a specific harmonic vibration. The sleeve was sized so that at exactly that frequency it would shift just enough to transfer that resonance directly into the frame. Not dramatically, microscopically, but enough to cause momentary disruption to the fuel and electrical systems through frame flex. He looked at Grip. Enough to drop the motor out at speed, every time, consistently. Grip was very still. His face hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had. This wasn't an accident, Caleb said. He needed to say it plainly. This was put there deliberately by someone who understood this bike well enough to know exactly how to make it fail in a way that looked like a ghost problem. Something no diagnostic would catch, something that would send you back out onto the road thinking it was fixed over and over until eventually the drop happened at the wrong moment on the wrong road and you didn't walk away. The silence in the garage was total. Even the sounds from outside, the distant traffic, the late birds seemed to press back from the walls. Crowley reached out and picked up the sleeve. He turned it in his fingers. His expression didn't change either, but his jaw moved once slowly like he was chewing on something that tasted like every bad thing he had ever suspected about the world being confirmed at once. He set it back down on the rag. How'd you find it? My uncle told me once that sometimes the problem isn't in the parts, it's in the bones, Caleb paused. I ran it on the dyno, reproduced the failure at 75 miles per hour. Then I looked at the frame itself instead of the systems. I felt the seam when I ran my hand along the down tube. Once you know what you're feeling for, you can't unfeel it. Crowley looked at Grip. Something passed between the two men that had no words in it, a whole conversation conducted in the half-second of eye contact between people who have known each other long enough that language is almost redundant. Then Crowley looked back at Caleb. And the fix. I cut the tube at the sleeve location, extracted it, machined a solid steel reinforcement slug to spec, and welded it in with full penetration passes. Then I reassembled the entire drivetrain and ran it on the dyno. Caleb's voice was steady. I pushed it to 85 miles per hour. It held clean for 45 seconds at that speed. No drop, no stutter, no hesitation. The frame is stronger now than it left the factory in 1947. Grip turned and looked at the bike. He walked toward it slowly like a man approaching something he wasn't sure he recognized anymore. He ran his hand along the down tube the same way Caleb had from the lower junction upward. He felt the weld, stopped, pressed his thumb against it. The weld didn't flex, it didn't give. It was solid in the way that a thing is solid when someone put their whole attention into making it so. Grip kept his hand on the frame and didn't turn around when he spoke. 5 shops, he said. 8 months, 3 times it came off the road with me on it. His voice was quiet, controlled, but there was something underneath it, not quite grief, not quite rage, something that sits in the space between the two. When you realize you've been hunted and you didn't know it. Every one of those shops sent me back out on a bike that had a machine kill switch in the frame. They didn't find it because they were looking at systems, Caleb said. Standard diagnostics, plug and play. Nobody looked at the bones. Grip finally turned around. His pale gray eyes found Caleb's and held them. You're 19 years old, he said, not as a question, more like a man saying something out loud to help himself accept it. Yes, sir. Why didn't you call me when you found it? Why'd you fix it first? Caleb thought about how to answer that honestly, because if I called you and said someone sabotaged your bike without a solution in my hands, I'd be handing you a problem and nothing else. You'd want to know who, you'd start moving, and the bike would still be sitting here broken. He met Grip's eyes. You needed the bike safe first. Everything else comes after. Another silence. Then Grip made a sound, not the non-laugh from before. Something different. Something that came from somewhere deeper. He looked at Crowley. Crowley was looking at Caleb with an expression that had changed from assessment to something approaching careful respect. The kid's not wrong, Crowley said. Grip pulled his phone out. His crooked fingers moved across the screen. He stepped outside and made a call. His voice was low out there, controlled 3 sentences. Then he hung up. He came back in. I need to make a few more calls, he said to Crowley. Not to Caleb. Tonight. Crowley nodded once. Grip looked at Caleb. What do I owe you? Caleb had thought about this number while he was waiting. He'd thought about it carefully. He could name a number that reflected the emergency, the complexity, the evidence of sabotage, the dyno time, the materials. He could name a number that would help him make 3 months of back payments on the shop's debt. $400, he said. Grip stared at him. Say that again. $400, parts and labor. You cut my frame welded and a reinforcement ran a full dyno test, and you found a machined assassination device in my motorcycle. Grip's voice was flat. And you want $400. The parts cost me $60. The labor was about 7 hours. Shop rate is, I know what shop rates are, Grip said. He reached into his cut. He pulled out a folded stack of bills peeled from it, set the money on the workbench without counting it aloud. That's $2,000. And that number is an insult to what you just did, and we both know it. He put the rest of the stack back. You tell me what keeps this shop running. You tell me what you're behind on. We'll talk numbers that actually matter. Caleb blinked. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Grip's voice wasn't gentle exactly, but it had lost its edge. How much is the shop behind boss? Caleb looked at the floor. This was the part that burned, not the fear, not the pressure of the deadline, the shame of the numbers. 4 months of mortgage payments on the property, 3 months behind on the equipment loan. Creditors have sent 2 notices. There's a foreclosure letter. He stopped. Total is around $38,000. Nobody spoke. Caleb felt the number sit in the air like something physical. Crowley picked up the sleeve again. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he set it in his jacket pocket. He said to Grip simply, "Call it in, full charter meeting tonight." He looked at Caleb. "You got coffee?" Caleb almost laughed. "Almost. I've got a pot that might technically qualify as coffee." Crowley's mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. "Put it on." What happened in the next hour was something Caleb couldn't have anticipated and couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't been in that garage to witness it. Grip made calls. Crowley drank bad coffee and sat on the workbench and asked Caleb questions, not about the bike, not about the money, about Hector, about how Caleb had learned, about what the shop had been before the debt and the grief had started pressing it from all sides. Caleb answered honestly, which was the only way he knew how to answer things. He told Crowley about being 8 years old and handing Hector a half-inch socket and Hector saying, "You've got good instincts, mijo, don't let anybody take them from you." He told him about teaching himself to weld from library books, because Hector said they couldn't afford a class, but a book never expired. He told him about this morning, 6 months ago, when he'd gotten the call from the hospital and had come into this garage afterward and just sat on the floor for 4 hours because he didn't know what else to do with his hands. Crowley listened to all of it without interrupting. When Caleb finished, Crowley set down his coffee cup and said, "Your uncle built something real here." He looked around the garage. "You can feel it. It's falling apart."